Hi everyone. So I'm back again, sitting here in the floor of my drawing room, talking books with you guys. So I haven't updated you guys on what I've been reading for a hot minute. So I thought I'd just jump in here and talk about the books that I've been reading and give you a little bit of a review on the way. So I am actually currently reading this mammoth of a book, The Count of Monte Cristo. I gave into the TikTok hype, the book talk hype. Everybody's talking about this book. Everybody's reading this book. Everybody's rating this book 5 stars left and right. So I just succumbed and I decided to read this 1,200 something page book, and I'm happy to announce that I'm almost at the end. I have around 100 pages left. What are my thoughts on it? Well, you have to wait till the next video to find that out, but I'll be updating you on that. Today, I wanted to talk about an author who's pretty close to my heart, who I've been following pretty diligently for the last couple of years, and that author is Obayed Haq. And this specifically is the book that I'll be talking about. It's named Daknaam Bhule Gechi, and I read this around a month ago, I think. I read this before I picked up The Count of Monte Cristo, so I just wanted to talk about this author. I feel like a lot of people don't know him very well, even though they should. So I just thought I'd shine a little bit of a light on him. So who is Obayed Haq? So Obayed Haq is a very mysterious character. He is shrouded in a lot of mysteries. He's very anonymous. You won't find many photos of him. You won't find any detailed biographies of him. There are very few interviews of him online. And he does this deliberately because in the very few interviews that I did find of him, he states that he wants his work to outshine his personality. He kind of highlights this phenomenon where the author might sometimes become a larger than life personality, where people start talking about the author and not really about his work. So he's very aware of that, and he wants to avoid that. So he doesn't really appear in many interviews. He doesn't give his detailed biographies. His contact information is very scarce. We do know about him is that he was born on 1986 and he lives in Kumilla, Bangladesh. So what I find really interesting about Obayed Haq is that he explores these very raw and overlooked aspects of life in Bangladesh. So he paints a picture of these characters that are not really heroes, but characters that are deeply flawed, and as a result, they are deeply human. He has a fascination for people that live in the margins, so marginalized people, people like thieves, laborers, tea plantation workers, forgotten revolutionaries, beggars, orphans, all of these people that living in the outskirts of societies and and living in the margins are people that he usually works with. The first book that I read of Obayed Haq was many years ago now. It's called Nil Pahar, and I loved that book. It was my introduction to Obayed Haq, and I was immediately hooked. The story is about an orphaned doctor, and he has a lot of tragedies in his own life because he is an orphan, but he does kind of grapple with life and becomes a doctor. And the story is set somewhere in the 80s in the Bandarban hilly tract areas of Bangladesh. So this doctor gets posted in the 80s in Bandarban, and at that time it was a very tumultuous time for the people of Bandarban, for the people living in these Pahari areas, and this doctor had to grapple with his professional life, his personal life, and everything in between. what I liked a lot about Nil Pahar is something which I really liked in this book as well, and I'll be talking about it more in details, is how he paints a picture of a landscape of nature. So that was my first book that I read by him. The second book that I read by him was in 2025. I'm sorry, 2024, not 25 if I'm not wrong. In 2024, a book of his came out in Boimela called Arkati. And I bought it because I love Nil Pahar so much, and I read that book. Even though I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Nil Pahar, I still appreciated the story a lot. The story is about British colonizers who are occupying the tea gardens of Assam and Sylhet. And Arkatis were the tree plantation workers who worked in these tree plantations. And among them was a young boy called Norin. And we follow his journey. Again, we have beautiful landscapes. We have the tumultuous description of nature. But I felt like that story dragged on and on a little bit. But I did like the ending. I did like the resolution of Arkati. And finally, because I like those two books so much, I picked up this book this year, February or March, I'm not sure exactly which, in Boimela. And this is not very hefty, obviously. It's not as hefty as The Count of Monte Cristo, but it's still pretty long. But it did not feel long. It flowed on really easily. And I thought this was probably his best written work that I have read yet. And yeah, I really liked it, basically. So what is the story about? The story is about essentially a family, a small family, a father, a mother, and a son. The son is not named in the story, so I've just decided to call him the protagonist. And they are people that are living in the throes of modernity. So when the narration takes place is not really specified, but what I guessed from the narration is it is somewhere in the early to mid 2000s, because they talk about the starting of things that categorize as modern, for example, electricity and television. So I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing that this is set somewhere in the early to mid 2000s. So it's about a family that is going through a financial crisis, and they're living in Dhaka, and the father and the mother is unable to bear the expense of the family. So they decide to move to the village. So the father, in this case, happens to have a rich heritage, a lineage in the Jomidari family, in the land owning Jomidari family. So he has a Jomidari lineage. He has no cash to his name. He has no kind of financial helpings to his name, but he has a lot of heritage, and he's very proud of that. He's very proud of calling himself someone who comes from the Jomidari family. So the family, they move out from Dhaka and they move to a distant village called Mohimganj, which is near the Indian border. So the mother is very skeptical about moving to this village. She still is not 100% convinced that they should leave their house and their life in the capital city and move to the village. But the father kind of realizes that they don't really have any other choice. They have to move to this village. So they move to the village and they move into this Jomidari house. And the house is incredibly old. It's completely abandoned. It's full of mice and it's full of spiders. But nevertheless, because it is a Jomidari house, it's very royal and it's very decorated. So the house in itself, I felt like, was a kind of metaphor for this dead royalty that Bangladeshi society had at one point in time. So to make things more interesting, this house is shrouded in this superstition no villagers come near this house in the fear that they are going to be haunted. So the superstition goes that there is a pregnant woman shrouded in white who lives in the vicinity, in the quarters of this Jomidari house, and anybody who sees this apparition, this ghost, will be cursed for life, will have to face death, and sometimes even worse. So when the father and the mother find out about this superstition, the father shrugs it off as a kind of village rumor. They say that the villagers are completely illiterate. There is no basis to this rumor. But the mother is not so quick to judge. The mother is a bit more skeptical. And we do find out later in the narration that the mother has already seen this apparition. So what happens is this family moves into this ancestral Jomidari house. They try to make it a home, and the mother sees the apparition. And in the meantime, the mother becomes pregnant. She starts to kind of equate herself with this pregnant apparition and this pregnant ghost. And later on in the narration, she befalls a tragedy and she dies. So after that happens, during this time, the protagonist is growing up, and he is around, I think, 16, 17, at the time when his mother dies. And the father goes into this deep depression, and unable to bear the burden of his depression, he gets up and leaves this house. So what he does is he essentially gives up on his fatherhood, and he leaves his 16 to 17-year-old son to fend for himself. So this protagonist is completely alone in this ancestral royal house with no money and no parents. What happens at this stage is that this protagonist, our hero, learns to fend for himself. So he starts fishing in the ponds of the Jomidari house. He starts collecting shrubs and vegetables and fruits. And since no one enters into the periphery of this house, and this house is full of lush gardens, everything that's in the garden belongs to him. So essentially, with no one to take care of him and no one he can take care of, he starts taking care of the house. He starts tending the garden. He starts feeding the animals around the Jomidari house. He starts repairing the river, repairing the ghat, and he starts creating an occupation for himself. So he fishes, he eats some of the fish, he sells some of them to the market, and his only ties to the outside world is when he goes to the village market to buy produce, to buy rice and dal for himself. When he goes to these markets, people look at him as if he is an alien, and he looks at them as if they are an alien. So he is someone who is completely outside the periphery of society. So he is completely marginalized, pretty figuratively and metaphorically. At one point of the story, electricity touches the village. The village lights up with lights everywhere, which blinds the protagonist because he's not used to light. He uses candles and hurricane lights in his house. And people move away from the gossips of the tea stalls and gather around the television. So that, I think, is also a very striking metaphor of kind of the pitfalls of modernity, of how it alienates people from the point of view of the protagonist, who is essentially living outside society. What did I like about the story? The first thing I really liked about the story is something that I always like in Obayed Haq, and that is his representation of nature. In Nil Pahar and in Arkathi, those are also very much situated in natural landscapes, and they are also very vivid. But in this particular book, he adds this additional detail of naming each plants, naming the rivers, naming the fruits and the flowers, and there is this deep connection that our protagonist feels with the nature around him. And the way that Obayed Haq writes about nature, I've learned so many names of trees and flowers and plants and their medicinal properties. So that additional detail, I think, is a huge plus point of the story. Another thing that I really liked is this juxtaposition between the domestic and the cultural. I am very used to reading about closed domestic spaces from female authors, but I don't really come across them in so much in male authors' writings. So it was really interesting to see Obayed Haq construct a story which is essentially within the four walls of a domestic house. So a male's perspective on the domestic sphere is something I found really, really interesting. I also really like the metaphor of the electricity, that kind of metaphor of ultra modernity and a deconstruction of this electric line, or this deconstruction of modernity from a third person point of view. I really like that. I loved the pacing of the plot and the writing. Even though it's a big book, it had me hooked from beginning to ending. It took me not a very long time to read and go through it at all. But the problem I have with this book is I have two problems, and they are problems that I find in each of Obayed Haq's stories, and that is the female representation. I wouldn't say that this book has the worst female representation that I have ever read. It's certainly not the worst that I've ever read. But the problem is that the females are pretty one-directional people. So they're either the mother or the mistress, or sometimes both. So there are essentially two females that are important to the story. At least in this book, there are females that are essential to the story, as opposed to the other narrations of Obayed Haq, which don't really have a female character up front. So I'll give him that. That's good. But the problem is that the female characters are either mothers who are kind of obsessed with this unidirectional idea of becoming a conventional mother, or they're a sexualized being. So I thought it wasn't the worst, but again, I think it could have been better, the female representation. And I felt like the ending of the story was a little bit abrupt and a little bit sentimental and idealistic. It definitely could have been better, I think. I'm not sure how exactly he could have improved on it, but it definitely could have been better than what it was. But overall, I would say that of the three books that I've read of Obayed Haq, this is probably still my favorite. Even though I do have a problem with its female representation, it was still really interesting because of the pacing, the plot, and the idea. The idea I found to be really fresh, really out of the box, and yeah, I really liked it. So that was my little review of Obayed Haq. If you haven't checked out Obayed Haq, he does write every year, and a book of his does feature in Boimala every year. So I urge you to keep an eye out for him. He is very good, and he is an important writer, writing about things that are important to our culture and to our society. So yeah, that was my introduction, hopefully, into Obayed Haq. I'll keep reading him as long as he is interesting to me. So thank you. Hopefully I will come at you with a review of this mammoth in a couple of days. Thank you.